Governments are often reluctant to issue warnings, and no world leader really wants to admit that their country suffers from things like inflationary pressures. No leader wants to take responsibility for the global problems of unaffordable housing, sky-high gas prices, massive double-digit inflation, or even empty store shelves. Leaders, they want to wish always to be seen as the only real reason that things are going the best that they ever have. And you want to be seen as a reason you have food on your table, you have a job, countless luxuries, and a little leisure time. So when they actually tell us the things that we don't really want to hear and they issue warnings that inflation, for example, is inevitable or could lead to a deeper recession, when they warn of global food scarcity, the power going offline for extended periods of time, or the worst weather in the historical record is coming your way, that's probably the time that you should start listening. You should always know that it's in a world leader's best interest to downplay the actual severity. So if they warn us that there's a 10% certainty, you should probably double that number. The Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, he just said that the U.S. recession is certainly a possibility. And as a prepper, I'll interpret that as what is likely to play out next. In this video, I want to view the issues that we're facing through a bit of a different lens to give us some perspective. So let's jump in.
Download the Start Preparing Survival Guide to help you prepare for any disaster. I'll post a link in the description and comments section below, or visit cityprepping.com/get started for a free guide to help you get started on your journey of preparedness.
If we haven't met before, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. All around the world, we can see the warning signs of a much more significant and brewing problem. Mexico, for example, has raised their interest rates. In Germany, they fear a shutdown of the Russian gas pipeline, which is pretty much a certainty now. Inflation drove the UK debt interest payments to surge. China and India, they're buying price-reduced wholesale oil from Russia, which is greatly enhancing their own economies, while simultaneously as they prop up and encourage Putin on his war efforts. Even if you don't follow the news or even believe a shred of what any world leader says, we should listen to the farmers and the truckers. They tell us part shortages. They talk about failing crops, drought, and a lack of goods to transport. And I would encourage you to listen to the store managers and workers who will tell you that they can no longer get this item, they can't find workers, or are witnessing a massive shift in consumer priorities and spending. The signs are really starting to materialize that show us something much worse is in our not so distant future. And it doesn't really matter whom you listen to or whether you tune everyone out. The future, it is coming. And the signs are that it will be a rocky, difficult time at best. But will our economic future be as bad as the mortgage crisis of 2008 or the energy crisis of the 1970s or the Great Depression of the 1930s? Will our world suffer as bad as the Spanish flu pandemic of the early 1900s, or experience a solar flare, or even a volcanic eruption, or just insert any other possible disaster, whether that's man-made or natural? And we can't truly know, and we can't honestly plan for all those possibilities. If we do, however, keep our wits about us, we can generally prepare to face a broad range of possibilities. Let me be honest, it sometimes feels overwhelming because it always seems that there is a little bit more work to do. In our prepping, we ask ourselves questions and we try to run scenarios in our heads. And I think that this really helps us imagine the unimaginable and anticipate the twists and turns that our futures could take. And here's the thing, it's great to be prepared for a broad range of disasters, but be aware that this necessary thought process can also fill us with anxiety. It can trigger our anxieties that may be rooted in past trauma and experience. I'll give you an example in my own personal life. When I plan for wildfire season, which we're currently in, I typically go through my list of preps and I check their locations. Has anything been moved? Are all the batteries good? Are the masks, the protective gear, the bug out bags, the equipment, and so forth? Is everything ready to go? And my mind is often filled with checklists where I'm checking and rechecking things. Then I might consider a recent fire in my state and the devastation that it caused to a neighborhood not much different than my own. Then I might reflect on the last wildfire within a close range of my home and how we were all ready to bug out. All this thinking, I think it's good, but it might trigger some anxiety or cause you to remember prior stress. In my specific example, there were wildfires, but maybe yours is a tornado. And most people who grew up in the Midwest probably had a childhood memory of crouching in the school hallway or maybe huddled in a musty basement. Maybe you lived through a hurricane or an earthquake as a child or an adult. Perhaps you were recently embroiled in a deeply hostile political discussion with a close friend or a family member that really ended up leaving you with your own dander up for days and days afterwards. These and similar stresses, they can resurface when we're planning out our preps. Prepping, it really requires imagining the possibility, and those possibilities are often interpreted through the lens of our own past experiences. If hard times are coming, understand those generations before you also had hard times as well. Did you, for example, have a grandparent who lived through World War II or the Great Depression or through smallpox? We had several families in our church when I was growing up that lived through these events, and hearing their stories, it always seemed like a distant world that I would never experience, but here we are. Yet they made it. Did you live through the mortgage crisis of 2008, the Gulf Wars, 9/11, job loss, or even a natural disaster? I have. And it was horrible at the time, but here I am today. I made it. And if you did, here you are on the other side of it. You made it. If you did have one of these grandparents, they were probably reluctant to throw out anything later in life. They probably developed ingenious ways to solve problems without having to make a run to the store or search Amazon online for a product that was made thousands of miles away because they had to learn how to do with what they had. I remember growing up, my grandfather, he had a belt. It was pretty tattered and, old, but I remember watching him sew it and make it usable because he lived through a period without having much money, and he learned how to do with what he had. And our past experiences, they really interpret our future course and outcomes. It's as accurate for us as it was for our ancestors and generations before us, because prepping really requires our imagining of scenarios that seem so real. Before we know it, we're feeling, if not reliving, the trauma and stress of our past, but in a different way. Suddenly we think and we feel that we're too far behind. And we start to really gravitate toward articles that indicate specific dates that this will happen or that may happen. And I recently have seen two such date predictions. One was about the economy's collapse a few days from now, and one was about a solar flare. And you would be mistaken to put your faith in any single date or any person who claims to know. When I think about that, I think of two things. First, the passage from the Bible, it says, "Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at evening, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning." And then I think about the psychics on television before 9/11. If you remember all those psychic commercials that used to air before 9/11, then after that day, which nobody saw coming, those psychics kind of mainly really disappeared. And you may think that this is odd, but I think there's a relationship. Your credibility is really shot when your job is supposed to know the future. What I'm trying to say here is this. You can keep your stress and anxiety lower if you keep focused on the task at hand. And you realize that you're never going to know the hour that you'll need your preps the most until that actual event approaches. Even then, if you have methodically prepared for a wide range of potential disaster, whatever befalls you is likely going to be of the lesser variety, whether that's 72 hours to a week or two of the aftermath. The majority of disasters, they typically fit into this category. Disasters lasting longer than this, they're rare, but they're still possible. So when I encourage in my Prepper's Roadmap course that people get 3 days, then 3 weeks, and then 3 months of supplies and preps on hand and give them the precise way to do it, it's for a good reason. Wherever they are with those preps when a disaster strikes, it will likely be enough to carry them through, independent of the grid and society. Trust me, a little goes a long way compared to others with empty cupboards, refrigerators, and no stored water. If the disaster looks like it will go beyond your preps, rationing and supplementing supplies through what you have learned through prepping can actually help you stretch your survival timeline even further. With that peace of mind in place, also do realize that there's no guarantee that your preps will be applied as you intended them. In the aftermath of any disaster, you may be required to pivot and change your well laid out plan of staying put. And I know that this can be a stressful decision at a time when you're already stressed. I believe that if you have prepped and planned, the decision will be easier and the outcome, while not guaranteed, will more likely be favorable for you and yours. In the prepping community, we tend to gravitate toward bad news and we're naturally pessimistic by nature. But again, this doesn't necessarily equate to the end of the world. And I would encourage you to keep things in perspective. Not every disaster is a catastrophe, and it's not our first trip around the sun. Will things get hard in the coming years? I think if what we're experiencing now is an indicator, yes, but things will likely get more difficult. So of course the question comes up, what can you do? I would encourage you, the same as I have been lately, continue to store food and get your water preps in order. Reference my free video, The Ultimate Guide to Building a Year's Worth of Food Storage, which I'll post a link to up in the cards above. I'll also put it in the description section below. And I would encourage you to reference my video on assessing your post-disaster energy needs and the options that you have available, which I'll also link to at the end of this video and in the cards. You need to develop and work from a prepping plan, or you can use the tool that I created, the Prepper's Roadmap course. And in that course, I've got a lot of downloadable guides, checklists, calculators to really help you understand what you truly need to face an uncertain future. And let's be honest with ourselves about two things. First, I think it's going to get worse before it gets any better. And second, we have it pretty good compared to previous generations and the different things that they've suffered and they've gone through. We've been riding a high of just-in-time delivery systems. We've had a green revolution of agriculture, and we really live in the Goldilocks moderate weather, at least up until now with recent increases in temperature. And we've lived in what is the most wealthy and resource-rich time of world's history. We live in a good life of abundance, really compared to many, and if times get significantly leaner, your prepping will serve to get you through. For me, my family is everything. They keep me from the dark rabbit holes of what could be in our future. And while I enjoy the nice things that I have today, at the end of the day, family is what matters most if this is all stripped away. I would encourage you the same as I always will. Stay calm, prep on, and let me know in the comments below what keeps you steady, what keeps you motivated to prep, or what valuable lessons you've learned from past disasters. I'm sure that we can all benefit from your input. As always, stay safe out there.